Are you a friend of Russia?
Well, we are a friend of the Russian people. We have a relationship with Russia that goes back all the way to the 50s. So broadly, why not? I mean, we friends don't have to condone and agree with everything that other friends do. I mean, I'm sure in an equal conversation, many of our Western partners have friends whom they may not be that pleased about acknowledging.
High Commissioner, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Lovely to have you with us. Lots of people in UK government at the moment talking about trade with India. How close is that deal to conclusion?
Well, look, I don't want to talk out of turn, but it seems to me that we are really quite close. Most substantive issues have been agreed upon. In substantive terms, most of the chapters that will constitute the trade deal are pretty much ready to go. There are always a few issues, but nothing that we believe cannot be bridged between two friendly countries. So I think it is close. I don't want to quantify that, but it is quite close.
So you couldn't say before the elections in India, for example?
Again, it is really up to the principals at the political level to decide if they feel they've got enough in the bag to be able to close it right now, or to sort of use the election period for the negotiators to try and eke out a little bit more by way of progress. But it's not that the election will cause us to lose steam or interest in the trade deal on either side.
Because is India determined to do this deal? Because there is an argument to suggest that it's actually much more in the UK's sort of benefit to tie this deal up than it would be for India.
Well, if you look at our recent track record, we've completed an FTA deal with Australia. We've done one with the UAE. We are close to finalizing one with the EFTA countries, which may well be done next few days, or at least a couple of weeks, therefore. So, absolutely, we're interested in this trade deal because of the importance we attach to the partnership with the UK. We see it as one of the means by which we strengthen our strategic partnership in a forward-looking way. And sure, if it helps the UK also, expand its trade relationships and deepen its trade relationship with us in particular, this is a good benefit for us too. I mean, what's wrong with a trade deal that encourages more British businesses to look at India, including eventually as investors? So we look at it from that perspective.
One of the biggest problems, in my understanding, is about access to India's market for UK businesses, particularly services industries. I mean, is that something that you are happy to give ground on, that you're happy to talk about?
Yes, I think what is being discussed, I can't obviously share with you the details at this point of time, but what is being discussed would be, from our perspective, much more than we've done with anybody else so far. So it would be a considerable expansion of our partnership in services, quite reciprocally, but even in goods also, there'd be quite a bit of new market access for both countries.
And what would India want?
Well, let me say straight up here that there is this notion that I've repeatedly pushed back against, that somehow the trade deal is about India seeking visas. We're not. We, just as in the UK, in India too, visas are not a matter of trade policy. They are a matter of domestic immigration policy, and we understand that. So this sort of discourse around that is, to my mind, a little overblown. That's absolutely not true. Yes, there is a mobility piece, but that is around Mode 4, which is essentially for businesses to be able to move their people across easily to service each other's market. And we would seek from you only what we are offering you too. That's perfectly normal. So for the 950 Indian businesses that are invested in the UK, and for the 600 odd UK businesses that are invested in India, it should just enable them to do business more efficiently and more effectively. That's all we're looking for.
And a big part of that is taxation, particularly when it comes to staff who are working here in the UK. Now,
absolutely.
From India's perspective, people are being taxed twice. They're paying national insurance in the UK, they're paying the equivalent in India too, and you're asking the UK government to end that. Do you have any hope that that will be something you can get over the line?
Well, it's certainly a major ask for us.
Is it a red line for you?
I don't want to describe it in those terms, but I'd say it is certainly an important ask for us, and we understand that our British friends have taken that on board as an important area of concern for India. It's not that you haven't done it for others, so it's not that we're asking you to do something that you've never done. How this is done, how this is packaged, in what way this is brought to effect, and what are the term lines for this. Those are the things that are in play. But the larger concept, I think, is something that both sides can agree is a reasonable ask. It's not an unfair ask that people who come here and are contributing shouldn't be required to contribute twice.
Is it in play though? Because from my understanding, speaking to people on the UK side, it's very much not an issue that they are willing to negotiate on. It's not something that they are prepared to give ground on, and they are not prepared to consider this issue of taxation. Their belief is if you work here, you contribute here, you pay taxes here.
Well, I don't know whom you're talking to, but I can tell you the ones we're talking to are this is part of the discussion, very much so. And you know, it's even been in the press that's come from sources in the British government. We're absolutely saying we'll pay taxes here. We're absolutely saying we'll contribute to the NHS, etc. If anybody stays here, they must contribute to whatever is a reasonable British ask. All we're saying is where it is something that is a social security equivalent.
National insurance.
Exactly. Where people are already paying back in India. It seems unfair to charge them twice. And this is not the only country with whom we have this. We have this with Japan, we have this with Korea, we have this with Canada. And with Canada, we've had this for something like 12 or 13 years.
Well, maybe the Chancellor heard you, because he said in his budget this week that double taxation is very unfair.
Yes.
So perhaps you've got a bit of hope there from Jeremy Hunt. The other question is whether or not India is holding out for a Labour government, because there could well be a new government in this country by the end of the year. It could well be a Labour government. If you look at the polls, there's a suggestion that Labour might be more willing to negotiate on that point.
Look, I mean, it is not for us to choose who governs the United Kingdom. That is for the British people to choose. We are keen to complete this deal at the earliest. How politics in this country plays out, it's not for us to.
So
it's
not
for us
holding
to take
out.
a position. No, why should we? I mean, there's a trade team up in India right now, in fact, trying to pull the last bits together. We've put in an extraordinary amount of effort at leadership levels, including from the Prime Minister's office, to try and get this across the line. But if I may, this is kind of an extraordinary argument. Occasionally we are told India is trying to push for it, so it's done for a Conservative government. Then we're being told we're holding out because we want to wait for a Labour government. Frankly, no, we want to conclude it with a British government. And as far as we're concerned, which government that is for you to decide.
Yeah. In terms of India's policy more broadly, would you say that it's an outward-looking country in terms of trade, or inward-looking at the moment?
It is increasingly outward-looking, but it is, you know, folks have to recognize three realities, really. One, that India is a complex society in terms of the diversity of economic capacity in India, right? We have done well in the last 15 to 20 years in removing literally tens of millions of people out of poverty. But it isn't, you know, we've not reached a level of prosperity where we can be purely an external oriented economy. We are extremely keen, therefore, to be able to make progress in a way that enables everybody to be taken along. We need to be able to take along our population, and we are a democracy. We have to accept that people will have different views of opening everything up at the same time. And the second important contextual point there is that everybody looks at somebody else and says, you're protectionist. But the reality is everybody is doing stuff that protects bits of their market depending on what is politically sensitive to you, and that's fair enough. I only decry, if I might, the tendency to find fault with somebody else, while not looking at the things that other countries are being protectionist about. I mean, truly nobody actually believes in the whole concept of actually free trade. It's always about free trade as long as I can make sure it's free for me.
Yeah, I mean, that is a really interesting point that you've just made there, because it brings into play this question about Russia. And Sergei Lavrov recently said that India has always been a friend of Russia, and he particularly highlighted some comments that were made whereby, India had reflected that other countries ought to look at themselves first before criticising Russia. I mean, some people in the UK might find that very difficult to swallow.
Look, I'm not getting into the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Our position on the UN and the UN Charter is abundantly clear. We have repeatedly said that, no less directly than by my foreign minister at the UN. So the legalities piece is abundantly clear. The only context that I think he was referring to, I don't know which bits he took out of context, because look, I mean, I have no idea when this was said and what pieces he took from my minister's conversation. But the essence of our conversation in the past has been about the energy trade.
Yeah, oil.
And the energy trade, I think we have a reasonable point that we have repeatedly made. We weren't buying much energy product from Russia. Our refineries are geared around light sweet crude that largely comes from the Gulf. Two of our major oil suppliers in the past, Iran and Iraq, are, for reasons you know as well as I do, not in a position to supply us that much oil. One because of sanctions, one for reasons that everybody knows. Another supplier, Venezuela, is again under sanctions. So the number of sources from which we can buy oil are in any case limited. The sources that we had on spot contract, you know where the spot prices are. And nobody who doesn't have long-term contracts is able to buy on the spot market effectively. But what actually happens, therefore, is we've been displaced into buying whatever else is available, because Europe and the UK are going and buying oil from these countries where we earlier bought oil from. We import 80+% of our petroleum requirement.
Yeah. So are you saying if you had a choice, you wouldn't buy from Russia?
If we had a choice, we'd buy it from wherever it's cheapest and most effectively available.
So you wouldn't take into account, because some people say in buying so much crude from Russia, you are helping fuel, and I know you don't want to get into talking about the geopolitics of war, and that's fine, but you are helping fuel a conflict by buying from Russia.
But we are also refining that oil and putting that oil into the market.
Well, I want to come back to that point, but just on that specific issue, in buying from Russia, you are helping to fuel a conflict. Are you comfortable with that?
Well, look, if I were to point out the number of countries whom you buy products from, which helps to fuel conflict and helps to fuel military dictatorships, which helps to provide all of that. If foreign policy were to be based purely on morality, I would suggest it would be a conversation that many countries would find it very hard to look at themselves.
So you are comfortable with it?
We are comfortable with doing what is necessary for India, yes.
Okay. You mentioned about what you're doing is essentially buying the crude, refining it and sending it back to Europe. And you said yourself...
Also to our own economy.
Also to your own economy. But you said now yourself in a session just now, I don't want to sign free trade agreements with countries which would allow goods into India through the back door. Well, that's essentially what's happening. You're importing Russian crude, you're refining it and you're selling it to Europe. And Europe doesn't want to buy Russian oil, but it is doing that because you are allowing that to happen.
You mean they don't know it?
Well, they do know it, but you're allowing it to happen.
Because they're buying it. You're buying it. The UK is buying it. When you say Europe, you're not including the fact that the UK itself is buying it. So, frankly, I think your outrage is a little misplaced.
You are in front of me.
It's rather interesting. The point is quite clearly here. We are not hiding the fact that we import oil from a number of places. We are one of the world's biggest refiners. Oil and petroleum, unfortunately, the way the world is configured, everybody is dependent on energy to power their industries, to power their vehicles. If we had a choice of not having oil from anywhere in the world, would we not want to go that way? Of course we would. As I'm saying, it's a huge economic drain for us to be buying oil all the time. As I said, 80+% of our energy comes from abroad. We are a hugely energy dependent economy today. So absolutely we would prefer that. But my point about the FTAs was different. It is about manufactured goods that a country has the option of concluding an FTA with us or dealing with us equally as a trading partner and giving those goods to us directly. We are not saying we have a problem with those goods or that country per se. We're talking about it being round-tripped around it.
Yeah.
That is
fairness. It's a fairness question.
That's a fairness question. It isn't a moral question, because the moral question is up to you to decide whether you buy it or not.
Yeah. I mentioned before Sergei Lavrov. He did describe India as a friend of Russia. Would you say that that's an accurate representation? Are you a friend of Russia?
Well, we are a friend of the Russian people. We have a relationship with Russia that goes back all the way to the 50s. So broadly, why not? I mean, friends don't have to condone and agree with everything that other friends do. I mean, I'm sure in an equal conversation, many of our Western partners have friends whom they may not be that pleased about acknowledging.
I want to conclude by talking about where India sees itself in the world going forward. We've talked about a couple of global conflicts, but there are likely to be more opening up in the coming years.
Oh, please.
We would all hope there wouldn't be. From the UK's perspective, how should we see India? What should we look to India for going forward?
Look, as my foreign minister said rather tellingly, we may not be off the West. Obviously, we are not located in the West. But in terms of the DNA of the nation, the political economy of the nation, we are akin to the West in the sense we seek the individual salvation is the larger framework in which people look at themselves. Democracy is a central pillar. The independence of institutions is something that is hard baked into our system. These are issues, of course, that we contest robustly in India, but our nature is very much of the West in that sense. And it is logical for the UK, of all countries in particular, the UK, to recognize this and understand it and actually work much more closely with us. For whatever reason, since the 1950s, understanding in the UK of India has dwindled quite considerably. The older generation of Britons knew India, instinctively understood India really well. And I think that is really the biggest inhibitor of the relationship. There is inadequate understanding in one country. And in India, we are almost convinced that it is one country outside our region that knows India. It's the UK.
Yeah.
And that gap is what really we need to address.
Why has that happened?
Good question. We need to study that a little more clearly. But I think over the decades, the tradition of having Britons go to India to sort of, not just for quick holidays, but to engage with India in that sense, to come to our universities, to teach there, to do business there, that has dwindled quite considerably. And, right or wrong, today the Global Britain strategy that your current government follows is an opportunity for Britons to re-engage with all of us in Asia, but I think particularly India, because if there is a country that in many senses reflects a lot of the sort of traditions of that we believe are shared, it is us, including cricket.
Let's not get on to cricket. I don't want to open up that particular can of worms. Just finally, is India still going to be called India going forward?
Yes,
because there is a suggestion. There's a suggestion that you could consider changing the name of the country.
No, I think that's misplaced. People are not. If you look at the preamble of the Constitution, the first few words say India, that is Bharat. So both names are in play. Bharat is the name of India in all of our region, of all of our other languages, Indian languages, and India is the name internationally.
And that won't change.
We've always used both.
Right, I see.
So people who are talking about this are probably getting again sort of all wound up about something that is, even today, if you come to the Indian High Commission, the exterior of the building says High Commission of India, and below that in India, in Hindi, it says Bharatiya Dutavas, which means Indian High Commission. Same thing in English and in Hindi. My passport says the same thing too. Nothing has changed.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having me.